The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. You have promised, O God, that you are with us wherever we are and whatever we are doing, to heal and to help, to give strength and make us whole. We pray that we all, and the members of this assembly especially, will be receptive to your promises and receive them with confidence and conviction, that armed by your Spirit, we will be able to forge good solutions to the current impasse, which promote justice, equity, and truth. Pardon us as we have missed the mark to this point, and yet we pray that we will be faithful messengers of your word and steadfast stewards of all your gifts. May all that is done today be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone. There he is.
Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 10 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must reopen the government. And I find it troubling that a majority of the Senate Democrats have chosen to severely jeopardize our military readiness, shut down essential government operations, and eliminate health care coverage for low-income children, all while setting an arbitrary deadline to address the DACA issue. And Mr. Speaker, I know that we must achieve comprehensive immigration reform, which includes providing certainty on the status of those brought here as children. But a government shutdown is not the way to achieve that public policy. We must continue to work towards a bipartisan agreement to protect the faith of the Dreamers and to ensure our borders are secure for the safety of all Americans. In accordance with the law, my Bellefonte and Titusville district offices will be closed and many of my staff members are furloughed for the duration of any budget impasse. Now, I'm going to remain here in Washington working to get this impasse resolved. It's my hope that cooler heads will prevail and we can quickly find a resolution to reopen the federal government. All Americans deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose? Gentleman from Maryland, seek recognition.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the second day of this Trump shutdown because Republicans won't take yes for an answer. Senator Schumer went to the White House and had a deal with President Trump until the Freedom Caucus vetoed it and forced the president to go back on his word again. Senator Schumer offered President Trump his border wall. Republicans said no. Senate Democrats offered short-term continuing resolutions to keep the government open. Republicans said no. Mr. Speaker, I offered a 4-day CR to keep the government open while we work on reaching a budget agreement that adheres to parity. Mr. Meadows objected, and the Republicans again said no. When I ask, when will Republicans take yes for an answer? I ask, will the Republican leadership allow its members to vote for a clean CR, to reopen the government instead of giving its most extreme Freedom Caucus faction a veto in order to perpetuate the Trump shutdown? Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to bring up H.R. 4872, the End of Shutdown Act of 2018, a continuing resolution that would immediately reopen government through Tuesday while negotiations continue on a budget agreement that adheres to parity on other critical issues.
The gentleman's time has expired, but under the guidelines consistently issued by successive speakers, as recorded in Section 956 of the House Rules and Manual, the chair is constrained not to entertain the request unless it has been cleared by the bipartisan floor and committee leaderships. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
No.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
1 minute advising stand my remarks.
Recognized.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the editors of the National Review explained the Schumer shutdown clearly in their editorial, Hang Tough Republicans. In no uncertain terms, Senate Democrats have blocked a bill to keep the federal government running and fund the Children's Health Insurance Program for the next 6 years. Senate Democrats have made a choice not to keep the government open. A government shutdown does not benefit anyone. It causes irreparable harm to our military. Over 100,000 National Guard members will be sent home from weekend training, and over 2 million service members will have their pay disrupted by the Senate Democrats' partisan politics. As chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee, I know that military readiness is at risk. Yet the government should be fully open for business if Democrats had not voted against the bill, a bill that has nothing to do with substance they oppose, to get leverage for a policy they favor. This Schumer shutdown could have been avoided if Senate Democrats had prioritized funding at-risk children and our troops over political grandstanding. Sadly, the Democrats' negotiating stance is give us amnesty or we'll make the government shut down and blame you Republicans at this. This is an unreasonable position. Hang tough, Republicans. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we'll never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, gentlemen, recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to address this cynical effort by the Republicans to link the Trump shutdown to children's health insurance, or the CHIP program. The fact of the matter is that if the Republicans cared about children's health insurance, or anybody's health insurance, they wouldn't have tried repeatedly to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They wouldn't have put in the provision in their tax scam that says that people don't have to buy insurance, which we estimate will result in about 13 million Americans losing their health insurance. They wouldn't have put a CHIP bill on the floor earlier this month or earlier this year that basically eliminated or cut back on the prevention fund, and at the same time said if you didn't pay your health insurance within the first 30 days that you would lose it, which CBO says would cause another 500,000 people to lose their health insurance. If you care about children's health insurance, which you clearly don't, then you don't want to eliminate and cut back on health insurance for the American people in general, which is what you were doing, sabotaging the Affordable Care Act every day. The only reason why you linked the CHIP bill to the CR this week is because you don't have to pay the subsidies for people's health insurance because they're going to lose their health insurance.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlelady from North Carolina, what purpose do you seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some Americans have not heard the truth about why we have the Schumer shutdown. The simple truth is that it is because Republicans believe in the rule of law, want to fund our troops, and the CHIP program. Democrats are advocating for illegal aliens. President Obama violated the Constitution when he signed an executive order allowing illegal aliens to reside here as legal residents. The court ruled his action unconstitutional. To President Trump's credit, he agreed with the court and asked Congress to find a solution to that issue and our broken immigration system. House Republicans are working on a solution and doing our job in passing appropriations bills and continuing resolutions to fund troops in our government. Senate Democrats saw an opening for their zeal to make these illegal aliens legal and have chosen to shut down the government. It's time for the Democrats to give priority to national security and legal people in our country. Vote to fund the government and come to the table to find a law-respecting solution to immigration. Stop the Schumer shutdown. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition? Without objection, gentlemen, recognized.
Now, there's a lot of rhetoric out there about why there's a government shutdown and who's to blame. Well, let's look at the facts. The GOP is indeed in charge at all levels of federal government, yet has not been able to do much of anything since then. They can't fund the government, and now they're asking for their fourth continuing resolution of only a few weeks yet again. The only major concrete thing they've really done is give tax breaks to their wealthy donors. and now they're in full spin mode trying to say the government is shut down because we don't want to let certain people into our country. Please. Look, we're fighting for parity and non-defense funding for things like schools and Head Start and programs like Meals on Wheels and homeless veterans assistance. We want to get funding for community health centers in CHIP. And yes, repairing the DACA agreement that's allowed a lot of good, talented young people to stay in this country is important to many of us as well. But let's remember, the only thing the Republicans have to show for their last year is a giant, wet, sloppy tax break for their donors and a way too extended honeymoon with the president. It's time to step up and put our country before our party, and we need to do that now. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a unanimous consent request to bring up H.R. 4872.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman is not recognized. The gentleman is not hear the unanimous consent request. The chair will hear the unanimous consent request. His 1 minute has expired, but the chair will hear the unanimous consent request.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a unanimous consent request to bring up H.R. 4872, the End the Shutdown Act of 2018, a continuing resolution that would immediately reopen the government through Tuesday while negotiations continue on a budget agreement that adheres to parity and on other critical issues.
As the chair has previously advised, that request cannot be entertained absent appropriate clearance. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The American people are demanding of us to do what is right. That's why I proudly voted yes to keep the government open, to pay our troops, to provide funding for our nation's military, to reauthorize CHIP, health care for children in need for 6 years. Instead, Democrats in the Senate voted no. They said no to all of these critical priorities: national security, health care for our children, keeping the government open, all while they pushed their own political agenda. The only thing they said yes to was the Schumer shutdown. Enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. Nothing in this bill is controversial. We did our job. We've passed reauthorization for CHIP, children's health insurance, not once but twice, and it is stalled in the Senate. Democrats own the Schumer shutdown. They've said no to policies the American people want and the American people need. Washington is broken. We need to get back on track. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to work together, work in the interest of all West Virginians and all Americans, working for working families, military families, and retirees. They're all depending on us. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Speaker, first of all, to the men and women of the United States military, how shameful it is to use you. You will be paid. And it's important to note that the Democratic Party, our leadership, is focusing on making sure your families are taken care of. This is a debate about making sure domestic spending so that you have education dollars for your children. And sadly, some of our soldiers are on food stamps. The CHIPS program to be fully funded and made permanent. Veterans benefit to continue. It's shameful. When I was growing up, the way to use language against a person running for office is for them to be called an in-lover or for them to advocate for integrated schools. They use the race card. Now today, the person who has the highest office in the land is using the race card, and sadly, congressional Republican members and leadership are using it by way of illegal immigration. And a political ad that has just come out to say that we're responsible for killings by illegal immigrants. Dreamers are not illegal immigrants. They're Americans. They're soldiers. They're doctors and lawyers. They're my neighbors. They're my interns. And I am saddened by this. I want the American people to know that the best moral stance to be is where the Democratic leadership is, because we're standing for all of America.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady is no longer recognized. For what purpose does the member from Texas seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent.
Do I need to hear the unanimous consent?
1 minute.
Order. I have unanimous consent.
If the gentlelady would yield, the chair will recognize. Until the gentlelady yields, I will not recognize. The gentlelady is now recognized for her unanimous consent.
Thank you, sir. I have unanimous consent to bring up H.R. 4872, the End the Shutdown Act of 2018, a continuing resolution that would immediately reopen the government through Tuesday while negotiations continue on a budget agreement that adheres to the parity and on other critical issues to stop the Trump shutdown.
As the chair has previously advised, that request cannot be entertained absent appropriate clearance. The gentleman from Texas, for what purpose you seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized without objection.
Mr. Speaker, my friend Sammy Mahan from Baytown, Texas, drives a jet black Peterbilt tractor all over America. And he asked this logical question: why does it take 60 votes for the Senate to make a decision? He said, well, the rule, I can't really say what he said. I'll just use the word nutty. Why have this rule? We all learned in elementary class that 51% is a majority. By requiring 60 votes to make a decision, government is ruled by the few, not the majority. Thus, a handful of senators can block progress. The result? The government is shut down. The military is not paid. Lovely. The Senate inconsistently allows the majority rule in some votes, but on others, 60%. The Senate should strongly consider what Sammy thinks about this archaic rule. Make a decision with 50%, regardless of what party is in charge. Sammy is right. This undemocratic rule is nutty. The sky will not fall if the Senate makes decisions by majority rule. And that's just the way it is.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute, move to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman without objection is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, a century ago, William Butler Yeats wrote a poem called The Second Coming, in which he said, "Things fall apart, the center will not hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." But in America, that's not our destiny. We can make sure things don't fall apart. We can make sure that the center will hold. Let's move beyond the blame game, and let's identify the moral center and common ground for reopening the government and moving America forward. Commanding majorities in Congress and in the public want to reauthorize and fund the CHIP program and guarantee health care for our kids. We should do this for a 10-year period and save $6 billion over a mere short-term extension. Commanding majorities in Congress and the public favor reauthorization and funding of the community health centers, which are indispensable for both children's and adult health. Commanding majorities in the public and in Congress favor passing a Clean Dream Act for 800,000 dreamers who are contributing to our communities and in school and serving our country. And all of us must favor a return to regular order and a fair and transparent budget process that allows all of our agencies, from NIH and NOAA to the DOD, to plan for the effective delivery of public services. Mr. Speaker, I have a unanimous consent request.
The gentleman's unanimous consent request will be heard.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I ask unanimous consent now to bring up H.R. 4872, the End the Shutdown Act of 2018, a continuing resolution that would immediately reopen the government through Tuesday while negotiations continue on a budget agreement that adheres to parity and addresses the other critical issues facing the country.
As the chair has previously advised, the request cannot be entertained absent appropriate clearance. The gentleman and lady from Missouri seek recognition.
Thank you.
To address the House floor for 1 minute and revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because I am frustrated. I'm fed up, and I'm concerned for our soldiers, our families, my constituents, and all Americans. People are filled with uncertainty. They are confused, and honestly, so am I. Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats shut down the government over a deadline that does not exist. They voted against a bill they have no issues with. Democrats have recklessly put 9 million children at risk of losing their health insurance. Over 2 million members of our military, the men and women who risk their lives to protect us, are not being paid. It is time for Senate Democrats to join us and reopen the government. They need to join us in passing the Children's Health Insurance Program, and they need to join us in putting our military readiness, our American soldiers, and our country before political gamesmanship. Stop the Schumer shutdown. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New Hampshire seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to speak candidly and directly to the American people. There are many, many issues that we agree upon, Republicans and Democrats coming together to solve big challenges. In my district in New Hampshire, people are dying, and they're dying from an emergency that did not exist, and a continuing resolution will not solve their problem. And that is the opioid epidemic that hits districts all across this country. People are dying, families are suffering, and our communities are hurting. We need to come together, and we can. We have a bipartisan task force with 100 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats. And just this week, 50 members, Republicans and Democrats, came together to ask for funding for this emergency crisis. We asked the President, extend the emergency. We need to fund. And now is the time, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent. Please, together, Republicans and Democrats, bring up H.R. 4872 to end the Shutdown Act of 2018, a continuing resolution that would immediately reopen the government through Tuesday, while we continue negotiations on a budget agreement that adheres to parity and other critical issues like this opioid epidemic. This is urgent. Please, I ask my brothers and sisters on both sides of the aisle.
The gentlelady's time for her 1 minute has expired, and in regard to her unanimous consent request, as the chair has previously advised, the request cannot be entertained absent appropriate clearance. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and change the subject.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, John Andrus, the North Dakota State Senator from Crosby for 22 years, died last week on Wednesday. He was a patriotic American who loved his Lord, loved his country, loved his state, and loved his community. John was a strong conservative who exercised his convictions with grace and facilitated dignified deliberations. And while John made a mark as a public servant at many levels, it was his work as a newspaperman that leaves the most impressive legacy. His columns were sometimes provocative, always profound, but never mean. John was the president of the North Dakota Newspaper Association in 1970, and in 1989 became the only North Dakotan ever elected president of the National Newspaper Association. John was inducted into the North Dakota Newspaper Hall of Fame in 2000 and received the National Association's Award for Distinguished Service. Distinguished service, the perfect description for John. And while he is being laid to rest this weekend because his servant's heart has stopped beating, his legacy lives on in his words and his witness to decency. May we all strive to his very high standard of statesmanship. God rest your soul, John. I love you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. Well, it's day 2 of the Trump shutdown, the first government shutdown in history when one party has control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. But I believe that the issues at the heart of this debate actually have support from a majority of Americans and a majority in Congress. So I ask my Republican colleagues, who are the 218 Republicans who would vote against funding community health centers as well as the Children's Health Insurance Program? Who are the 218 Republicans who oppose addressing veterans programs, workers' pensions, and the opioid epidemic? And yes, who are the 218 Republicans who would vote against the Young DACA recipients and the DREAM Act? We don't lack votes. We lack a willingness from the President, from President Trump and Republican leadership to negotiate. I am here, we are here, ready to work. The Democrats want to come together with the Republicans on a bipartisan deal to end the Trump shutdown. And Mr. Speaker, I have a unanimous consent request.
The chair is listening.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to bring up H.R. 4872, the End the Shutdown Act of 2018, a continuing resolution that would immediately reopen the government through Tuesday while negotiating continues on a budget agreement that addresses parity on other critical issues. Thank you.
The gentlelady's 1 minute, his time has expired. In regard to her unanimous consent request, as the chair has previously advised, that request cannot be entertained absent appropriate clearance. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the American people can count. 44 Senate Democrats voted to shut down the government. 10 times as many Democrats as Republicans supported denying funds to our military, to children's health care, and to everyday Americans. The Senate Democrats must be held accountable. Their actions halted government services. They can't blame anyone else. The numbers don't lie, and the American people can count. 44 Senate Democrats voted to shut down the government. Let's hope they change their minds and vote to get back to work. We have much to do to make America great.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I served on active duty. I want a functioning government, but yet we're in day 2 of the Trump shutdown. How do we get here? Well, Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House, and they could not come up with a bill that would pass both houses signed by the president. In fact, the harmful House CR was rejected by the U.S. Senate on a bipartisan basis, couldn't even get to 51 votes. But Democrats have a variety of ideas to reopen government, and we can't even get a vote on it because we don't control the floor, we don't control the agenda, we do not control this government. And watch this. My request to reopen government won't even get a vote. Watch this request get shut down. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to bring up H.R. 4872, the End the Shutdown Act of 2018. A continuing resolution that would immediately reopen the government through Tuesday while negotiations continue on a long-term budget agreement that adheres to parity and other critical issues.
The gentleman's time on 1 minute has expired, and the gentleman's UC request, as the chair has previously advised, that request cannot be entertained absent appropriate clearance. With that, the gentleman from what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're starting hour 39 of the Schumer shutdown weekend. I would like everybody to understand that this is a 4-week spending bill. 4 weeks. It has nothing to do with the March 5 deadline for DACA, has nothing to do with DACA at all, and indeed just to keep the government running. So if we get 9 or 10 senators on the Democrat side to realize that it has nothing to do with DACA, maybe we can go on and do the people's business. That said, many of my constituents are calling up asking about the FISA documents, the FISA memo. And I do want to see them put out in front of the public and the supporting documents go with them after having had a chance to look at those confidential documents earlier downstairs. But I also want us to be confident in the process that Chairman Bob Goodlatte, Chairman Trey Gowdy, and our Intel Committee Chairman Devin Nunes have in place to do this methodically and carefully, because we want to be sure these documents are brought forward and used in a way that's most advantageous to get to the truth. So part of that will entail that we need a special counsel to investigate and not have the DOJ and FBI investigate themselves. I yield back, Mr.
Gentleman's
Speaker.
time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, the previous speaker said this is a 4-week budget for the government. And another speaker said they've done their job. You know, the most basic function of a majority party who controls the House, the Senate, and the White House is to write a permanent 1-year budget for the government of the United States. This is the 4th temporary continuing resolution. You're 113 days late. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, Secretary of Defense says operating under a continuing resolution is about as unwise as could be. And you say you're here for the troops? 4 weeks, now 18 days maybe. It's cost the Pentagon billions. It's cost us $1.4 billion of lost transportation projects. That's 21,000 jobs. That's hundreds of projects across the country. Social Security needs new computers. They can't sign a contract to get them. And instead of accepting responsibility for your failures to pass a single appropriation bill, you're now demonizing the dreamers. Pass a budget. Give us our appropriations, not 18 days, not 30 days, for the rest of the fiscal year.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute. Order. Order. Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's simple until you make it complicated. There's a poster in my office that says just that, and it kind of describes where we're at. We're having a lot of debate in this House about the current government funding situation, our military, the Children's Health Insurance Program, which, by the way, House Republicans actually voted to extend more than 2 months ago and again did this past week. Here's the simple part. The Children's Health Insurance Program can be reauthorized, the government can be reopened, and paychecks sent to our troops without delay if Senators Chuck Schumer and Bob Casey and other Senate Democrats change their votes to make that happen. The short-term funding bill and children's health insurance reauthorization is about as bipartisan and non-controversial as you can get around here, yet Senator Schumer decided to make a crisis out of it. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be able to ask Senator Schumer, Senator Casey, would you vote to reopen the government today? Would it make a difference if I said please? I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose is the gentlelady from Washington State recognized? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here are the facts. The first shutdown in modern history when one party has controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. The fifth Republican shutdown in 30 years and 4 continuing resolutions since September. 4 Republicans joined Democrats in voting no on the House bill last week because it is not a solution. Mr. Speaker, this Trump shutdown is no way to govern. Republicans had plenty of time to pass chip reauthorization, but instead they want to use it for hostage taking. They had the will to act on the GOP tax scam to benefit corporations and the wealthiest, but not on pensions for working families. And they certainly had no interest in a solution for Dreamers, an issue that 87% of American people agree on, and Republicans right here would vote with Democrats to pass a solution to. There are 2 bipartisan bills in the House to protect Dreamers and 1 in the Senate, but this isn't about real solutions. Republicans just want to continue to use immigrants as a scapegoat and end legal immigration as we know it. And Mr. Speaker, as an immigrant myself, I am tired of being called the worst of the worst. I am tired of hearing Mexicans be called rapists or Africans called vulgarities that I cannot even repeat on this floor. Mr. Speaker, let's end the shutdown now with real solutions for the American people. Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I have a unanimous consent request.
The chair will entertain the unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to bring up H.R. 4872, the End the Shutdown Act of 2018, a continuing resolution that would immediately reopen the government through Tuesday while negotiations continue on a budget agreement that adheres to parity and on other critical issues.
As the chair has previously advised, the request cannot be entertained absent appropriate clearance. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Democratic Caucus, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration by the Chamber.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 709, resolved that the following named member be and is hereby elected to the following standing committee of the House of Representatives. 1. Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, Ms. Plaskett.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Thank you, Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
What purpose is the state your inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, am I parliamentarily correct that a continuing resolution is not necessary if, in fact, an appropriation bill has been passed to fund the government?
The gentleman is not stating a parliamentary inquiry.
Am I correct?
It's not stating a parliamentary inquiry. Pursuant to Clause 12A,